Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining for our first webinar of the year. We're excited to have you. We'll be talking about running your design system as a product today. And I'll go over a couple housekeeping rules. Feel free to say hello in the chat, where you're from. Happy Lunar New Year if you're celebrating. Feel free to add your Chinese zodiac animal if you know it. Yeah, and as the session is running, you're welcome to put questions in the chat. And before we start, if you want, we have a Zero Slack community where you can sign up and ask additional questions in our webinars channel. And after the panel discussion, the panelists might be able to answer some of your follow-up questions. If you need any assistance, feel free to message Connie Greasley or Jules Mahe, and they'll be able to help you. And then we're also going to send a link to the webinar a few days after we're done, so you'll get a recording of this. And then, as always, don't be a jerk. We appreciate that, and we have no problem removing people who are jerks on the webinar. So, and then, wanted to jump into just a quick reminder. If you've been to one of our webinars before, you might have heard how we document. It's a survey that we do every year to just get a pulse on the design system documentation world. And toward the end of last year, over 500 people shared their information. And we spent the first couple of weeks of this year and last year putting together the analysis, and we found some really, really amazing insights. And we can't wait to share it with you. It should be ready in February. So if you're on our emailing list, you'll get notified when it's available. And you can definitely use it to see if your team is on the right track, use it to set goals, make business cases for more resources, and so on. So that's pretty exciting. Today, we have three amazing panelists. We have Morgane Peng, who is Design Director of Societe Generale Corporate and Investment Banking. We have Jack Reeves, who is the Digital Director of Mates Inc., who recently served as Design System Strategist at Helly Hansen. And we have Ellis Capon, who is a Senior Product Manager for Design Systems at JustEatTakeaway.com. And I'm Michelle Chin, a Design Advocate at zeroheight. So with that introduction out of the way, let's begin. All right. So the way this will work is I will have a couple questions to ask the panelists for about the first 30 minutes. And after that, we'll leave the remaining half of the webinar available for our audience to ask questions, and we'll select the questions that we'll ask our panelists. All right. So to kick it off, the first question, how is managing a design system different from managing another product? And maybe how is it the same?
I can jump in if you want, as the product manager here.
Go for it.
I guess. Yeah, so I think, it is still very similar in my experience with design systems. You're still doing a lot of the things that you're doing with traditional products that you've worked on in an organization. You still have and you still require that kind of cross-functional team of designers, developers, product people that you might still have. I find that you are much more of a generalist for absolutely everything else that the business is doing in regards to front-end development and front-end design. I think Morgan and Jack would agree, and everyone else in the chat here would agree as well, that you do understand a lot of what's going on across the whole organization, whereas maybe in other product teams, you kind of are a specialist more in your area. I think you're much more of a generalist across everything. And you're obviously then a specialist in the design system topic as well. So I think it's still very similar. You still have that product iteration, that product kind of process of researching and ideating and executing the plan and then repeating that as well. However, your focus is a little bit different, a bit wider as well.
Yeah, I've got to really agree with you there. I mean, I think all those points were perfect. I think the only thing I can add to it really is about constant commitment from the teams. Like a lot of the other products I worked on earlier, they were the kind of things that could be put down and maybe picked up 6 months later, 7 months later, potentially. Whereas with design systems and what we've seen working with multiple brands is once that they get into this, they become a bit more like infrastructure, and they become essential to really keeping the lights on for the organization.
Yeah, and to build on this, I would say, because Jack mentioned infrastructure, it's true that having a design system for 8 years now, I really feel at the beginning we were really thinking it as a pure product. But by implementing this product across many entities, especially if you work in a big organization, you realize that you kind of have responsibilities. In addition, you really have to make sure that everything you put in there can really be scaled across almost everything. You can always have snowflakes, but part of the job is really to make sure is this sustainable at scale. And once this is in place, what we have found out over 8 years is you end up also driving a lot of decisions through the system. So it's not just like one feature can go wrong. It's like if it goes wrong in the system, it goes wrong everywhere. So that kind of really changes the scale, I think, of what we do. And I guess a lot of responsibilities are tied into that.
Yeah.
And I think as well, like, you are still delivering value for the business. There are a lot of design system teams out there, and unfortunately at the moment there's a big shake-up in the industry, and I know some people are affected by it, which is awful, but as a design system team, you still have to deliver value and show that you're delivering that value. So whether you're starting up at the beginning of your journey or you're seen as infrastructure in the business and you're 8 years into it, like Morgane in her business, you still have to show that you're delivering value. So I think there's different things as you go along the journey, how you can do that, but that is how it still kind of relates to a product, I think.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense. I wanted to back up just a little bit, and maybe you can provide the audience some context around your design system experiences, the design systems you've worked on, how old they might have been, that type of thing. Jack, would you like to go?
I can go first. Yeah, let's. I think so. I started working on design systems in 2016, 2017 for the Canadian telecom company Telus. I had the pleasure of working with some really talented people, and design systems weren't that big a community back then. So there's some really interesting challenges, and seeing how some of the people were solving them was really, really interesting. I since moved on to Mates Incorporated, and we've developed design systems now for quite a few brands. Most recently, as was mentioned earlier, Helly Hansen. With Helly, what we've been doing really is taking design systems a little bit further, rather than just thinking of the website and the apps as products, but rather going into the whole system and using design systems as kind of the red thread that weaves through all of the organization. And that's led to some really interesting challenges, working with point of sale devices in the stores, looking at email design teams, working with off-site channels for wholesale, such as Zalando and Amazon. How do all these different parts connect into, what was such a closed ecosystem at the start? And, that's been really exciting to work on. I'm very happy.
Very cool. Morgane, would you like to go next?
So I guess my specificity is I've been working on what I'd like to think as a single design system for 8 years, from basically having no design systems, or I think back in the days, graphical guidelines, I think that's how they were called, published by the communication departments in PDF. I think some people may relate to that, maybe less and less, to having a set of library that then we want to reuse, but then obviously not everyone was at the same pace. So then you had to explain, can we all reuse the same thing? And then we had multiple versions of different teams trying to get design systems, trying to harmonize all this just to rationalize what goes into a system. Should we have 1, 2, 3? What would be the criteria? Up to today, where we've been evolving this thing that we call system for 8 years and changing things along the way. But yeah, essentially it's one big system that is used for all of financial services. So just to clarify, I work on the B2B side. So it's a system that is used for anything that would be stock markets, foreign exchange markets, financing bridges, wind farms, things like that. cash management, all these kind of financial, like very financial niche cases. And yeah, so that is kind of my story there. And that includes also putting in place the governance and different types of setup with the design system team, a council, we call it a council today.
Okay, yeah. I remember those graphical
Cool. Yeah,
guidelines.
I'll go last. So I was first introduced.
It looks like you're muted, Ellis.
Sorry, I don't know if it was. I don't know if anyone could hear me. I
We
couldn't
can
hear
hear
you there though. Yeah, so I first kind of got into design systems about maybe 4 years ago when I was at Lidl. They're a big German discount retailer. Everyone in Europe definitely knows them. In the US, you might not know them yet. But yeah, I was basically introduced to it there. It was a very kind of basic one to kind of what Morgane was talking about. And then I was hired by News UK to work on their design system, which is called NewsKit. I was there for almost 3 years. We built out an amazing team there, some of the best people that I've worked with for sure. And we built a really comprehensive design system that was able to then work across all the different brands that News Corp owned, which obviously dozens of them, which is really, really interesting. And then I moved over to justeattakeaway.com, which is similar to DoorDash in the US. We own Grubhub in the US and Skip in Canada, and then many other brands across Europe. But yeah, I work here now, and we are at a really interesting point. We've merged 2 companies into one, and it's really interesting how the design system has kind of been at the center of that merger, and how important it's been for aligning the style and the kind of visual language across it. The team have done an amazing job now, up to now, and now we're kind of looking to unify it. We're looking to build out web components and really kind of unify the whole of Just Eat Takeaway across the whole world.
That's very cool. And I think a lot of teams run into that situation of merging products, even if it's not through an acquisition, but just kind of consolidating and aligning and figuring out how to get like a unified design system. And to kind of carry on with the idea of like infrastructure and kind of like a long-term strategy of evolutions of design systems. My next question is, should design systems be managed like products, like with a backlog and a sprint board or a roadmap? Anyone want to take that? And maybe elaborate why that should be or why that shouldn't be?
Ellis, maybe as a product,
I can say it.
Yeah, manager.
Yeah, I mean, I just like bluntly, like yes. I don't know how we do it otherwise. You know, you still need to have a roadmap. I think roadmaps are like ultra important for any project, with design, with engineering, in tech or not. And yeah, like it's super important to have that kind of vision of what you want to do internally as a design system team, whether that's implementing design tooling, design ops tooling that will help the organization, you know, dev tooling that's going to help developer experience, or things that can measure the adoption of systems that loads of people have talked about before. So that's all the kind of internal stuff that you might want to do outside of improving the product itself. But then also you need to show value, as I mentioned earlier on. So, you know, being in constant contact with the other product managers and leaders across the organization, to understand what they're doing. Because if you're not delivering value for them, ultimately their products are the ones that make money, like directly make money perhaps. So you need to be also supporting those people as well. So I think running it like a product with a backlog and with boards and everything like that, and roadmaps is like an absolute must. I don't know what Jack or Morgan.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I think, you know, backlogs, having the vision, having the North Star, having the sprint board, super important. As long as you have a specific, you know, user group and a specific set of goals that you're all driving towards, then it makes the most sense to be done this way. I think the only thing that I can add again is, you know, what we're realizing as well is dealing with these broader organizations now is that not everybody is aware of what that means to manage something like a product. So, you know, as like design leaders, we're having to go into some of these teams that have never used or never had a product-based backlog. You know, they might have used Trello, and teach them exactly what this means and how a sprint works in practice. But I think, you know, even there, they're seeing the value of, if you've got this specific user group and these specific goals, how that can really help show value, you know, in these short periods of time, and quickly iterate upon that to deliver towards the roadmap. So it's been fun getting to teach people as well those things.
Yeah, maybe just to add something that is a bit different from product. Obviously, you got users, you got like to communicate on releases, work iteratively. But I find that maybe that what's a little bit different than a product is design system is also a tool to drive compliance. Coming from the banking industry, it's a fun word, but what I mean by that is there's a lot of things that you want to embed, such as the quality of what good means on the UI part, on some rules, for example, on content, which means it's a strange product because people who are using it can sometimes feel that the design system people are also the police, and we're kind of policing them, but because we're also driving standards and for lack of better word, rules part of the system. So that's why I think in a sense it's a bit hard sometimes, because obviously as a product you would want to service your clients well, but at the same time you need to drive strategically where you want all the products that use the design system product to go. And I think this part is a bit hard to articulate sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely can see that, knowing being on design teams myself and having to kind of really advocate for some of these changes, right? Yeah, makes total sense. So when it comes to tracking and managing your design system work, how are you typically doing that? Like, what does your planning process look like, or what tools are you all using?
So we're using zeroheight, obviously, but you know, the main part of that is just a simple change log for us. We have automatic Slack notifications that go through every time something's changed. But I've got to be honest, I mean, it's quite unconventional, but my favorite toolbox is quite boring. It's Google Slides. Like when we have our stakeholder meetings, you know, they can be, you know, every week, bi-weekly, every month. We update a single living document that grows and grows as the project goes on. So by the end of a project, it can be hundreds of pages long, but we kind of detail, you know, every bit of user research. We take the highlights out and we present that to the stakeholders, but it keeps this kind of like audit trail, this log going through, that when anyone new joins the project, if somebody leaves, they can come on and they can catch up with everything. They can see what's happened, they can see what's going there. And then, you know, for looking forwards, we obviously have our backlog and we make that public to everybody so that anyone in the organization can jump in and see what's on the road ahead.
That's really fascinating. I'd love to like pour into one of your decks to see like how much content is in there and the evolution of things. I think that's a really cool idea.
Yeah, it is. It's by the end of it, some of them can take a good 2 or 3 minutes to load up because you get like 700 slides with graphics in, but it works super well. I encourage everyone to try that.
Yeah, and similar to Jack, I think slide decks are pretty useful because they get shared and they can be added to other slide decks from other stakeholders. So you want to be sure that you use the same media as things that are going to be used in committees and decision, budget decision meetings, this kind of thing. So in my case, that's more PowerPoints, but you get the idea. And same for timelines. We actually have a tool internally where we track all the big projects, and we wanted to make sure that design system is there as well. So everyone can see that it exists, see where it is. And that's mostly for tracking, I would say, milestone deliverables. And when it comes to tracking decision, I think design system, because obviously it is so broad and it has to be used by other products, it's really important to track also the design decisions and technical decisions that embedded in there, because otherwise everyone's going to ask, why did you make it this way or that way? So for us, it was quite important to use a tool that allows asynchronous decision making. And back then, I think when we looked at what we could use, we ended up deciding to use the same tool as our developers. So we use GitHub.
Okay.
Yeah, well, we're keeping the change log as well. But then also we are, and I have done in News UK as well when I was there, running quarterly surveys to track usage, and to also on the other side of tracking is to get feedback and capture things like the Net Promoter Score. So whilst we're tracking the changes in some kind of change log, running these surveys and gathering like the Net Promoter Score and things like that, sentiment analysis, making sure that the documentation satisfaction is good, what could we improve, and that sort of thing has been really helpful as well to kind of track how we're doing and how people are actually perceiving the design systems as well.
Yeah, very cool. It seems like there's a lot of different tools people use, but it sounds like if I had to summarize, using something that is visible for people to see and shareable is really helpful, just to really create that presence for the design system. Awesome. All right. So my other question, switching gears a little bit, when it comes to managing your design system as a product, who should be managing it? Should it be a PM or design managers, design directors, developers, everyone?
I come from a sports background. I grew up playing rugby, and I think design systems are a bit like playing on a rugby team. I think you have a game plan, you have a coach, you have captains. Just like in a design system, you kind of have your North Star vision and your roadmap. You have your PM, that's kind of like your coach, and then you have your captains, who are the guys on the field, that are your design and tech leads. And I think the analogy works really well, because as you're going forwards and you're practicing and you're doing your iterations and your sprints, by the end of it, everyone knows exactly who to go to for certain different actions, and you all kind of know what the other person's going to do almost before they do it, just like in a rugby team. But yeah, I think really it's just important to have a clear person outlined at the beginning for whether that is, okay, if we need to know what the game plan is for today, that's the PM. But if we're looking for a specific action, then that's maybe the design lead, or it's maybe the tech lead, and these people can help run those decisions in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. I agree completely with Jack, and I think it also depends on how big your organization is. If you're a small startup or a scale up and what have you, you might not have the ability to do that. We can chuck over to Morgane in a minute. I know her team's the system is more distributed among many teams, whereas like we work in a systems team, and I've worked in teams before at News UK where there was a head of design systems, like a design systems manager, Nick Dorman. And I think it depends on the maturity of the organization, the tech organization as well. And yeah, I think everyone should be responsible for it. You've got your design managers and your engineering managers who are obviously not there to be told what to do by me, by a product manager, because that's stupid. But I think product managers are useful for helping the system grow. I think a lot of product managers do come on to design systems later on, maybe after they've managed some traditional products beforehand. So I think maybe it's part of that evolution where we've understand what the needs are in other parts of the business, or other parts of organizations, and product managers can help that. But not every system needs a product manager. I would probably agree with that. But Morgane?
Yeah, definitely. Honestly, do what works for you. All companies are different by size, but also depending on the culture, and depending where you're at in your design system journey. For us, I tried to track how many times we changed the governance. I think we changed 4 times between the very early stage where and we were a very small design team, so everyone was doing design system, was contributing, to the point where the team was too big and everyone was complaining that meetings were inefficient. And then we decided to have some core design system people who decide for everyone else, till everyone then was unhappy again because they were saying, oh, there's 2 people deciding for everyone. So we changed oh, hello, so many times the structure. So yeah, even depending where your organization, you may want to adapt depending what would work best for decision making and also adoption. To give you an example, design system is something we started in the corporate investment banking, but 2 years ago, we decided to share it with the group entity. And this is a tricky situation for anyone who worked in a big organization, because we don't have the same hierarchy, I would say, except the big boss, but you're not gonna go to them if you have any issue, honestly. And so we decided to change the structure again, have this council where each side could appoint someone to represent the user. And the way we made it work, I think, is really clarifying the rules to be that council. We really wanted to have designers and developers on the ground, so no managers. This is how I actually removed myself from the day-to-day operation of a design system, just to protect this kind of environment for people to work on it. Again, we did that because we wanted to share it further and make it work and avoid any complications in terms of politics. But potentially you may not face this. Maybe you'll face it at some point. So yeah, I think it has to be evolutive, like everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can really agree. I mean, when we were at Ellis, we also had a federated design model as well, where we had a design system council, and we had people nominated by each team to represent their team in the council. And that worked super for managing a team, 300 people in and out of the design system. I think, that's a great approach as well.
Yeah, we started to do that in News UK, where when the American part of the business started to get involved, it was like, okay, how do we now democratize the design system and get more people involved? And I know that they were pushing advocates and things like that, and getting these kind of people to really push the advocacy of the system in each business unit and each company, and setting up that council as well between the UK part of the team and the US part of the team was really important.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's really great to hear a lot of your perspectives, because they are so different. But I think, it really does depend on the situation you're in, and maybe there might not be a direct role that does the leading. It might, evolve, or maybe people wear different hats and take on the responsibilities of organizing or, managing and that type of thing. So I think we are at the portion where we jump to questions for the audience. And Jules and Connie have flagged some questions. I think there was one question I did see. People were concerned about Ellis's pillow on his couch moving, but hopefully everyone realized that was a dog under there. And so the dog has left the webinar, because we might not have been that interesting. But it's a mystery solved, and Ellis is safe. So let's jump to the first question, which is really around, there's been a lot of questions around metrics. So what types of metrics are you all collecting to kind of prove the success of your design system, and how are you collecting them?
Yeah, I posted a Medium article that I wrote a couple of years ago, I think, in the chat. I'll post it again. There you go. But yeah, I mean, so yeah, done. But yeah, like things like I mentioned before, we captured the Net Promoter Score. I think you can probably drive your engineers mad by trying to get them to figure out a solution that scrapes a code base to measure the adoption of a design system in code. I think it's a bit unrealistic in a lot of organizations. So it can be done. We've definitely seen it been done before. But I think things like capturing people's sentiment towards the system and the Net Promoter Score, which you can measure over time and see how that kind of correlates with your major releases and things like that, might be really, really good. Satisfaction scores for your support that you give, the satisfaction score for the documentation that you have as well. And then also to kind of turn it on its head a bit more, at Just Eat Takeaway, we're very lucky that our Chief Product Officer is a massive, massive advocate for accessibility and inclusivity. And she sees the design system as a way to improve the accessibility and inclusivity of all our products, which is amazing. Like we're very thankful for her support. But looking at the amount of violations that we get in accessibility violations that we get using tools like Applause, for example, is something that we're tracking now. Is one of our metrics. So yeah, I've talked quite a lot. about that. But
No,
yeah,
it was great.
It's very helpful.
It's really good. I think from my side, there's three different kind of like user groups we look at. So when we're measuring our metrics, we look at our internal team, and that can be as simple as, components waiting to be built, components built in a particular period. But then, we have our user group really. So that's, again, like Ellis said, usually done through surveys and engagement and feedback. Again, consistent surveys that we send out quarterly. And then, if, like Ellis mentioned, if you've got an organisation that's big enough, you can measure the impact of those design system changes over time. When we were at Ellis, the project that we built I built on that team after we did the design system was something called Site Builder, which was like a headless CMS that used design system components to make a drag and drop page builder for the whole organisation. Ended up being rolled out. But because they did that allowed them to split test components really, really easily as they were going into production. So then we could actually see the benefit to the business quite easily at large scales. Again, so yeah, you can kind of measure those kind of metrics as well if your organisation has the power.
As for us, well, I guess I can say that we should probably do more in terms of metrics, but we are in a pretty comfortable position where design system is seen and recognized as a strategic asset. Therefore, even to be on a business platform, you have to use it. So that's why we don't actually need to measure adoption, because if they don't want to use it, they won't be on a business platform. They won't be able to be released. So I think, yeah, so one thing less to track. Obviously, you can track bugs. I don't know if it's my culture, my company's culture, but we have people who are very vocal and who like to express their discontent, and so it's very interesting to track those people as well, because as much as sometimes the way of the feedback delivery can be a bit harsh, it's still very valuable, and we've kind of made some major changes thanks to their feedback. So I would say we're still pretty much more like in a qualitative phase of measuring metrics. And also I think maybe I'm a bit biased, but I'm very, very worried about metrics in general. I like to joke that, it's a bit like if you were tracking the number of variants of buttons you create, it can just go wrong very, very quickly. So yeah, I guess that's for a situation.
I think you can definitely get caught up in it, and it's one of those things that as a product manager, especially, like, I must have, a Google sheet that has all these metrics in it, or a board somewhere. But at the end of the day, qualitative information and data is just as important, and interviewing people and chatting to people is just as important as well.
Especially when you're driving change. That gets me curious. How often do you look at this spreadsheet? Officially, unofficially?
Every day. I don't know. I report to my manager Damien probably quarterly. Okay. I'd say, as in that's what it gets reported at. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think metrics. I think it must be nice when you don't have to record and track metrics. But I feel like that's like the exception and not the rule. But in the past, I think, what's really helped is when I've had to pitch to stakeholders, I kind of try to understand like what their experiences with design systems are. Do they have scars or traumas from previous design systems, in a way that I can relay any data or information that would resonate to them? Just because, yeah, like you said, like a measurement might not be as helpful. Like a quantitative measurement might not be as helpful as maybe like a qualitative metric. All right, so another question, switching gears a little bit, beyond business value, can you suggest some key steps to take to build out a design system iteratively, and how to get tech buy-in early on?
Yeah, Dan Moore posted something about this recently, and I've got to be honest, that's kind of our way of doing things as well. It's a bit of to get tech buy-ins, especially, it's a bit of a ninja approach. Like, we usually go and build it first and prototype, even if we've not been asked to. And quite often that's how we pitch those things back to them. So we'll say, look, this is what we can do. This is a problem that you've been having. We've already kind of made the solution. Now you just have to wire it up. And then you're actually providing them value straight away, rather than trying to sell them some fictitious value that's somewhere down the line. If you can show them a physical, tangible mock-up prototype of what you're going to do and how this one thing can change a huge amount, then they see it quite clearly.
Yeah, seeing is believing.
I think we can all quote Daniel. I think he actually did this talk for you guys at one of the conferences in London. Your first component, I think that was the name of the talk. Super, super interesting. Basically, he was saying that instead of doing buttons, we should really focus on what brings value, like what is difficult for other team to do, because honestly, no dev team needs another dev team to make buttons. And I love the way he said that. If you ever watched any talk from Daniel, that rings very, very true. And I'd say to get buy-in, if you want buy-in, you need people to get interested. If you want them to be interested, you need to solve potentially a problem for them. I mean, that's how it works in the corporate world most of the time in projects. And by knowing more what they want, what they need, I think that's the way you get buy-in. And maybe just to give you a real example here, we like to joke in the team, and I think Harry is here listening as well, that we like to piggyback on things. So whenever we hear someone complaining about something, we're like, oh, wait, we could totally do that. So for example, when we wanted to improve a color system, instead of talking about color from the technical side of things, we actually said, oh, we could implement something in the design system that would solve our color issues at scale for accessibility and basically different things we wanted to do. And we didn't really have to say the word adaptive color, but we just pitched the idea because actually a client was complaining about not seeing the price properly. So that was the lead, and you piggyback on it. And that's basically almost what we've been doing since 8 years. You can always piggyback, but you have to listen to what people need first.
Yeah, we at News UK, we had quite a well-established design system news kit at the time, and then I think after like a year and a half or so, maybe a year, we pivoted a bit, and we pivoted some of our engineering and design resource onto actually delivering products for the business. So we had a really powerful theming system, and we had brands like The Times, The Sun, TalkSport, and Virgin Radio, and others that all had very similar requirements. So the team, the sister team to the design system, if you like, were actually span up to deliver agnostic solutions like account, checkout, help, hub, and things like that were kind of quite generic products that could be the same in any organization, but they were all built using the design system and using the theming system, and then that really kind of amplified the value that the design system had, and it really helped tie in these organizations to using the system as well, because now we handed over those products to the teams that run them, and then they were then becoming more competent with the system as well. Yeah.
And just to go back to one thing that Morgane was saying, like you mentioned it right at the end there, Morgane, like listening. I mean, that is the best tool that is in your arsenal. Go and talk to them in person if you're possible, and listen to what problems they're facing. That will tell you your first components to build, and that will tell you how to get buy-in. And usually, no one's happier to ask to go for a coffee and to tell you what problems they're having. That's a fun conversation, and it'll really deliver what you need.
Yeah, having coffees, taking coffees with people is a skill, I think. But actually, I think obviously we're in an industry we love to share. I mean, that's the reason I think we're all here tonight, which is great. But I feel sometimes it's too tempting to stay in a bubble, and in a sense, I can't go to my business, hey, can we do this because Daniel said that, but that's what we end up doing. Like, look, they're doing tokens, we need to do the same. But there's people, we find it hard to relate to them. And so listening more on their side, obviously you have to stay informed in the industry, and you can share with the community struggles and stories like that. But at the end of the day, you have to convince the people you actually work with in your company. And that is still requiring human skills. So yeah, you can't just send them some Medium articles. although we're all writing Medium articles these days.
Yeah, I think I really like that aspect of listening and trying to figure out how you can solve problems for them too, to really get that buy-in. I think that's definitely really helpful and shows a lot of empathy going forward. Um, and I think like, so there's an aspect where at some point they do understand the value, but there can be a little friction. And this is another question that the audience has asked is, um, how have you been able to close that gap so with design systems, when developers and designers are creating a component, like how do you close that gap with timing it with the application development? So for example, this one engineering team building a feature needs a component in the next sprint, but for the design system, it might take more than a sprint to create that component, and they want to use that component, but it's not ready yet. So how have you navigated that challenge?
I think I'll take this one first, but I think just do it. And like if the design system team don't have a component in the library ready that is meeting the needs, then the other team should go on npm and find something else that they can use. They should use whatever they have, and then if later the more high quality, more performant, more accessible component built by the design system team is then available, there should be that agreement there to retrofit it. But I think it goes back to our first question around like road mapping and things like that. And if you've, no organization is perfect, but if your product managers have communicated well enough and that strategy's there, the design system should be working a few months in advance of that feature team that need that component. So the stars should align, but it doesn't always work. And in the past, we've just said, just go ahead and implement what you want, and let's work on that later. And it's an easy sell for them because they're getting a much more high quality component that is longer lasting and more accessible for their users as well.
Yeah, exactly the same, really. I mean, I think that's where the documentation is so important. And to be honest, where we use zeroheight the most is in cases like this, where we have to say to somebody, hey, you go ahead and build it. Here's the documentation. Here's how it's been done. We'll follow it the best you can. And then, we make it better. We improve upon it. Once we have time, we try and bring that back in and see how it is. Back to Morgane's point earlier on about the federated design system as well. I mean, that's part of this. If you can decentralize the design system and it doesn't come to depend on just a few people in one office, but gives everybody the ability to network without you and to share that design, say, hey, how's this going? The design system team is busy. What do you think? Maybe it's the e-commerce team can throw in some input, maybe it's the go-to-market team, but decentralizing can really help as well if you really need to move that fast.
Yeah, and I would say sometimes maybe you shouldn't rush to design the components because you haven't seen yet at scale all the rules and variations you could have. So as long as I guess you have a clear rules of like, if it exists already in the system, then use it, don't create a new one. Just because you haven't found the documentation, that can happen. If it's a very snowflake, we call it snowflake. So if you're the only project that needs that, build it yourself because it will never be in the system level. But then if you start seeing the same needs again and again, might be a component, but also you may not have the full picture of what this component is to be. So just to give you a real example, we very early on made a lot of pickers, date pickers, category pickers, because I mean, yeah, everyone's struggling with pickers. But we only very recently, I mean, as of now, working on the currency picker. And you could think a currency picker is easy, right? No, because sometimes the currency has to be written in letters. There's different acronyms. Sometimes you want the flag in there. Sometimes you don't want the flag in them. Sometimes it's not a single currency, it's two currencies. So something that seems easy is actually not. And if you build one component, one currency picker, maybe only a fraction of your user would be able to use it. That case is really worth taking the time to regather all the use case to create a currency picker that could service the most products. Yeah, date pickers are a rabbit hole, indeed.
Yeah, I feel like every component is never an easy component. There's so much more to component than just what it is at face value. So Morgane, we actually have a question specifically for you. What are some of your recommendations to drive adoption for governance processes from the team?
I guess I can ask which team? I guess the organization, or maybe the. Okay, I'll do both cases then. I know that's a common pain point is getting designers to actually adopt a design system. I know it's not so much, although it can be the case for developers, but I've known, because I've been asked this question a lot, how do you get designers to pitch in, to give feedback on design system, to use it, and not complain that it's ruining their creativity, things like that. For us, what really worked is making sure they are part of the process. Again, that's everything that we mentioned before, that instead of being here, hey, you just have to use that thing, otherwise I'm going to police you, to make sure that they can give feedback, that they could work on this. So for example, for some components, so for example, the currency picker, it's someone who wasn't part of the core design system until, let's say, who's working on this, because it's someone who had the most knowledge on this and have seen the most use case. But it's also making sure that it's part of the way of working. So maybe design ops. So they always think, oh, can I reuse a component? Can I reuse something, a pattern that exists? And driving adoption, I guess, for the rest of the company, that has to go through stakeholders. I feel sometimes you could have early adopters and people who believe in the system, but if it's not driven by high up there, people have so many priorities, so many things to do, that if you don't make it a priority for them, it's normal that they're not going to focus on it. So for us, again, we solve that by saying this is compulsory to be on a business platform. That kind of becomes a priority for them. But I'd say for companies who don't have this policy in place, you still got to chat with high up there, make sure they are convinced, and so they can enforce or just give a stamp of approval that is the right thing to do in terms of strategy for the organization.
Yeah, I think the carrot and stick approach works really well. In my, like, it's enforced, it has to be used, this is the way it works, this is the governance process, and you really should adhere to it. But then also trying to make it a fun process that people want to be part of. You know, whether it's pre-COVID days, everybody in the council meets up and we have coffees and we have really nice muffins and we go to that extra level to make that the meeting to go to. You know, whether it's making swag and giving that to the team members so that everyone feels like special and that they want to be part of the governance process, and change it from kind of like the meeting that everyone's dreading, which I'll be honest, when we first started rolling these things out, that's what they were. They were the boring meetings, but then by the end, it's like, okay, we've injected a little bit of fun into it as well.
Yeah, for sure. Like getting over that initial hurdle is rough, but once you're in a more of a maintenance mode, it's a lot more fun for sure. All right, a little bit of a philosophical question. In which part of the organization should the design system team be located? Should it be in brand or product or tech or somewhere else? None of the above?
It's a difficult one.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in different companies that do different things, and they've both worked. I don't know. I think it depends not just on where it sits, but also the strength of the disciplines in the company. So the strength of the design discipline and the willingness to fund it, and the same for engineering. We at Just Eat Takeaway, it kind of sits. I guess it lines up into product eventually, into the CPO, but then so does design. So it's I don't really know.
I'd say close to dev is better. If you could be close to the devs, they're the ones who actually implement it. You can have the best design system in theory in the world, but if no one ever uses it, then it's not really a design system. So that's just my top tip from experience, that if you're far away from those guys, it's a bit of a harder sell.
I don't know what to say because obviously it really depends where you are and where in the process you're at. Yeah, I mean, again, just to give an example for us, actually the very, very initial, I would say first initiative of design system was actually on the dev side, because they were probably bored of always re-implementing the same buttons all over again. So they're the first one who actually put in place a tech library. And then they probably realized they probably needed some designers on this. But ever since now, it kind of maybe have shifted more on the design side, which is, for example, release notes are written both by developers, but a lot by designers, which I still don't really know why, but the person seems to enjoy it. Hello, Henry, again. So yeah, it just works. And maybe at some point, someone else gonna join a dev who really enjoys communicating and writing release notes, and maybe they'll do it. So I guess it will also really depends on the people, and it's hard to make a rule because, again, but it's true to all projects, I think. The success really depends on the willingness of people and how they work, and sometimes there's this chemistry or not. So yeah, I guess it's more like contextual to the people actually working on design systems.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot can depend on your team makeup and their situation and their interests, as well as your org structure and how products are aligned to business units or within bigger development engineering departments and so on and so forth. All right, let's wrap it up with one interesting question. How do you make the case for making design system changes across a product when weighed against potentially juicier feature improvements?
Yeah, touching it, it's that consistency in brand, which really does help, and that baked in benefits that you get with the design system that the design system team does, right? So, we've all seen it where engineers have implemented something that isn't accessible, doesn't have the right arrow labels, etc. And, it might be the case that if the design system had been used properly, then that wouldn't be a problem, and it wouldn't have to go back and retrospectively fix that, and it won't be tech debt. So I think, having everything baked in will be obviously much, much more beneficial than worrying about a lot of it later. And then making all the brand consistent. So Just Eat Takeaway have a really amazing, everyone knows the bright orange brand that we have. And we went through a period of mergers and acquisitions, and the way that we've actually unified a lot of those brands and acquisitions is that we've used the design system, and the design system's been mandated from above, and it's been linked with these projects that have been basically about rolling out the visual guidelines across the whole organization. And the team have done an amazing job at that, and the design system is well adopted. Everyone got behind it. So that's where it can make a really, really massive impact, I think, there.
Yeah, I think another aspect, depending on the size of your team, it all changes on the maturity level in your organization. But I think, you have minimal acceptable quality standards, and you use that. Like, if it's got to meet those, or else it has to get done this way first. But if something maybe meets those, like we talked about earlier on, in case of not having time to build a component, but a third-party team maybe building that instead, like, I think, it comes down to the problem that you're solving and like the prioritization. And as with most things, it's negotiation, which thing there is going to deliver the most value versus the brand impact. And yeah, I think you can only really do that through negotiation and good communication. And that's why muffins are important for all of those governance meetings.
I wanted to piggyback on Ellis and Jack's questions because I didn't understand the question initially, but they talk about things completely different. So do you mind repeating the question? Maybe it's getting late, that's
sure.
why.
Yeah, so how do you make the case for making design system changes across a product when weighed against potentially juicier feature improvements?
Ooh. Actually, sometimes you just got to accept that there's some changes you cannot do right now. And I guess it's quite fortunate that we live in a world where tech evolves. So there's going to be a point in time where you will have to do a technical upgrade of a library, whatever technology you use. And so for us, the biggest structural changes that we cannot do directly now. We actually keep it. We know that there's going to be this change coming, and we do it at that moment. But it's true that it's hard sometimes, and I guess you have to arbitrage between the different topics, but it's a difficult one.
Yeah, for sure. I could definitely see that. And that makes sense. I think, sometimes we really want some design system changes to really come across and immediately, but maybe, we just have to be okay with that the newer feature has to get pushed out, but know that, technology does evolve quickly and we can put in a change. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. I definitely feel like I want to join Jack's team for some muffin and coffee. So, but thank you so much for joining us in this panel. If questions didn't get answered, feel free to add them to the Zero Height Slack channel under the webinars channel, and we can see if Ellis and Jack and Morgan want to hop on and answer them. But we did record this webinar, so once we get the recording, we'll do a little recap and share the link out to the recording for everybody. But thank you again for joining, and thank you, Jack, Ellis, and Morgan.
Thank you all very much.
Very much.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Yeah.